The throne was colder than Elias had expected. Not physically. Its surface adjusted instantly to his body temperature, an elegant courtesy of alien design, but symbolically. It carried a weight that pressed inward, not down. A pressure that made breathing feel like a conscious decision rather than a reflex. He had not meant to sit there. That fact replayed in his mind with every slow second that passed. The chamber was vast, circular, and impossibly balanced. No corners. No shadows that belonged to anyone. The ceiling arched high above, alive with faint constellations that shifted to match the diplomatic calendar of the day. Delegations from a dozen systems occupied curved tiers of seating, each tailored to physiology and hierarchy. Elias knew his place, or thought he did. Observer, human liaison, seat assignment, peripheral, neutral, forgettable. Instead, he sat on white leather bordered with silver filigree directly beside the central throne. Beside her, Queen Erin Valsyra did not look at him. She faced forward, posture flawless, spine aligned with the ancient geometry of rule. Her skin was a deep, luminous blue, marked by faint bioluminescent sigils along her temples, symbols of lineage, authority, and continuity. Her armor was ceremonial but functional, dark alloy layered with sharp elegance. A crown of crystalline metal rested against white braided hair that fell like deliberate architecture over her shoulders. The chamber had gone quiet the moment she entered. Elias felt it more than heard it, a collective recalibration. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. He realized then what seat he had taken. The consort's seat, empty by tradition, empty by loss. His pulse spiked. He began to rise. Erin's hand closed around his wrist. The contact was immediate, firm, controlled, not desperate but not optional. "Don't," she said softly, her voice shaped by a private acoustic field meant only for him. The word carried command without volume. Elias froze. Her gaze never shifted from the council before her, but her grip tightened just enough to communicate intention. "Stay," she added. Every protocol he knew screamed at him to apologize, retreat, vanish. Humans did not occupy symbolic seats. Humans did not substitute absence. Humans certainly did not sit where grief was still politically weaponized. He swallowed and stayed. The council resumed movement as if nothing had happened, which meant everything had. Delegates adjusted atmospheric fields, biometric translators hummed back to life, and layered voices filled the chamber, measured, polite, lethal beneath the surface. Elias stared straight ahead. His mind raced through consequences, diplomatic reprimands, quiet removal, public correction that would follow him for the rest of his career. Yet none of that happened, because Erin did not release him. The throne beside them, hers, radiated presence. The seat beneath him radiated implication. 2 seats occupied suggested stability, continuity, the illusion that the throne had not been hollowed by death. He understood then why she had stopped him. He was not a person in this moment, he was a statement. The first speaker rose, a crystalline being encased in refractive light. Trade corridors, border stability, mutual restraint. Elias nodded at appropriate intervals, though the words barely registered. His entire awareness had narrowed to the weight of her hand around his wrist. Her grip shifted subtly as arguments sharpened. When veiled threats emerged wrapped in polite phrasing, her fingers tightened. When conciliatory language appeared too quickly, they loosened. It was a language of pressure and restraint. He learned it instinctively. His arm began to tingle. Minutes stretched, or hours. Time behaved differently inside the chamber, elastic and intentional. Elias became aware of small details, the faint hum beneath the floor, the controlled temperature fluctuations, the way the white leather beneath him did not crease despite his weight. At one point his stomach betrayed him with a quiet sound. Erin's thumb pressed lightly against his wrist. "If you faint," she murmured, still not looking at him, "it will be recorded." "I'll remain conscious out of spite," Elias whispered. The corner of her mouth moved, barely. A delegate gestured toward the empty space behind them, the symbolic absence that hovered like a ghost. Elias felt the tension spike. Aaron's grip turned cold, precise. Without thinking, he adjusted his hand, not pulling away, not gripping tighter, simply shifting so his presence was undeniable. A human reaction, grounding, silent solidarity. Her breathing steadied. The delegate finished speaking. Aaron responded. Her voice filled the chamber without rising. She dismantled the argument with elegance and memory, citing precedents that predated most of the council. Holographic projections shifted in real time, data aligning in her favor. Elias felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Pride, not in himself, but in the act of staying. As the session dragged on, he realized the council had begun watching him. Not openly, but with the careful curiosity reserved for unknown variables. A human occupying absence, a living counterweight to grief. "You're doing well," Aaron said quietly. "I'm doing nothing," he replied. "Exactly." By the time the cycle lights dimmed to signal the first procedural pause, Elias' arm had gone numb. He no longer cared. The fear that had once screamed in his thoughts had dulled into something steadier. Resolve. Whatever this moment required of him, he would endure it. Standing up now would be far more dangerous than staying seated. And somewhere in the quiet gravity between them, something had begun that neither of them had planned, but both recognized. The throne was no longer empty, and the council could feel it. The numbness in Elias' arm had settled into a distant, manageable ache by the time the council reconvened. He no longer registered it as pain so much as proof, evidence that time was still moving forward, that he was still physically present in a moment that felt increasingly unreal. The pause had not brought relief. If anything, it had sharpened the atmosphere. Delegates returned to their places with new calculations behind their eyes. He could feel it now, the subtle shift in how often their gazes flicked toward him, the way conversations resumed with a fraction more care. During the recess, assumptions had been revised, models updated, questions raised. Why is the human still there? Queen Erin released his wrist only long enough to adjust her posture, then rested her hand again, this time more loosely, not a restraint but a deliberate connection. The difference mattered. Elias straightened instinctively, matching her stillness. The silence before the first speaker rose felt intentional, as if the chamber itself were waiting to see whether the illusion would hold. It did. The speaker was from a coalition known for exploiting emotional fractures. Their species prized patience, often letting others exhaust themselves before making a single, devastating observation. When they spoke, the translator rendered their words gently, almost kindly. They praised progress, commended the Queen's composure, spoke of continuity. Then, with surgical precision, they referenced the late consort, not by title, not by name, by implication. Elias felt Aaron's hand tighten immediately, harder than before. The pressure was sharp, almost painful, and for the first time since he had sat down, he sensed the edge of something dangerous beneath her control. The chamber reacted. Atmospheric fields fluctuated subtly. A collective attention snapped into focus. This was not an accident. Elias' mind went blank. No training had prepared him for this. No manual addressed the appropriate response when a ruler's grief was being dissected in real time, and his body had been made part of the political geometry. So he did the only thing that felt true. He leaned closer. Not enough to be dramatic, not enough to draw overt attention, just enough that the space between them closed, that his shoulder aligned with hers, that his presence became unmistakably intentional rather than incidental. His hand adjusted around hers, not tightening, not resisting, but holding. The pressure eased. Aaron did not look at him, but he felt the shift in her breathing. Slower, deeper, controlled again, she spoke. Her voice carried across the chamber without amplification, calm and precise, edged with something colder than anger. She acknowledged loss without apology, reframed absence as a condition of leadership rather than a vulnerability, spoke of governance designed to endure beyond individuals, beyond bonds, beyond grief itself. As she spoke, the holographic projections responded. Treaty clauses stabilized. Probability models recalculated. The coalition's data fields flickered, then dimmed. The speaker fell silent. Elias stared straight ahead, heart hammering, acutely aware that something irreversible had just occurred. He was no longer merely occupying space. He had acted. The realization unsettled him. The council moved on, but the dynamic had shifted. Arguments softened or sharpened depending on who spoke. Threats became more carefully veiled. Every so often, Elias felt Aaron's fingers tighten briefly. A warning, a cue, a silent request to remain exactly as he was. He complied. At one point, a delegate gestured openly toward the consort's seat beneath him, their tone polite but probing. Elias' stomach dropped. He felt the chamber lean inward, waiting. Aaron responded with silence. The silence stretched. It was not empty, it was deliberate, a space forced open and left unfilled. Elias felt the weight of it press against his chest. He understood dimly that this was a test, not of her authority but of the image they presented together. He did not move. Seconds passed, long enough to be uncomfortable, long enough for the silence to become a statement. Finally, the delegate lowered their appendage. The moment broke. Aaron's thumb traced a small, grounding circle against the inside of his wrist. The gesture was so quiet, so intimate that Elias wondered if he had imagined it. "You learn quickly," she murmured. "I'm improvising," he whispered back. "That is often better." Hours blurred together. The chamber lights cycled through subtle shifts meant to accommodate dozens of species' circadian needs. Elias' body protested. Hunger, stiffness, fatigue. But his mind remained sharply awake. He was aware now of how carefully she managed herself. The way her posture never sagged, even when arguments turned cruel. The way her voice never cracked, even when grief was baited deliberately. The way she allowed herself only the smallest releases of tension through him. The thought unsettled him more than the danger. Why me? As if sensing the question, Aaron leaned a fraction closer. "They will try again," she said quietly. "Not today, but soon." "To remove me?" Elias asked. "To understand you," she corrected, "and whether you are temporary." He swallowed. "I am." She considered this. Perhaps. The session edged toward closure, the most delicate phase where words weighed more than fleets. Elias felt the chamber tighten again, pressure building toward resolution. He realized something then, with a clarity that startled him. At some point, fear had stopped being the dominant force driving his actions. He was still afraid, but it no longer ruled him. What ruled him now was something steadier, a sense that leaving would fracture something fragile. That presence, however accidental it had begun, now carried responsibility. When the final objections were dismantled and the treaty text stabilized with a resonant harmonic tone, Elias felt the shift ripple through the chamber like a released breath. Agreement. The council began to rise, atmospheric fields retracted, data slates powered down. The performance of power gave way to exhaustion. Aaron did not let go of his hand. "Stand," she said softly. He hesitated, then rose carefully, legs unsteady. The absence of her touch was immediate and startling, like stepping away from a heat source he had not realized he relied on. She stood as well, taller than him by a fraction, crown catching the chamber's fading light. For the first time she looked directly at him, not as a symbol, not as a tool, as a person. "Do not leave the station," she said. It was not a request. Elias nodded, heart racing again for entirely new reasons. Whatever had begun in that chair was not finished, and he suspected the most dangerous part was yet to come. The corridor outside the council chamber felt narrower than it should have. Elias noticed it immediately. The way the walls curved just a little too close, the way the ambient light seemed calibrated for species taller, broader, more confident than him. The station had returned to its normal rhythm, voices overlapping, transport rails humming, the low thrum of life continuing as if history had not just tilted slightly off its axis. Queen Erin walked beside him, not ahead. Not behind, beside. The detail mattered more than it should have. No guards flanked them. No ceremonial procession followed. The absence was deliberate, a statement as controlled as any speech she had delivered hours earlier. Elias could feel eyes tracking them from every direction. Staff, aides, minor officials who paused just a fraction too long as they recognized her, and then, inevitably, him. Questions spread faster than sound. He kept his posture straight, hands at his sides, resisting the urge to fidget. His body still carried echoes of the chamber, stiffness, residual adrenaline, the faint phantom pressure where her hand had been. He wondered how long it would take before that sensation faded, if it ever did. They reached a private lift recessed into the station's inner ring. Erin placed her palm against the control surface. The system recognized her instantly. No chime, no announcement, just quiet compliance. The doors slid shut behind them. For the first time since he had sat in the wrong seat, they were alone. The silence was different here, not ceremonial, not weaponized. Simply quiet. Elias exhaled without realizing he had been holding his breath. His shoulders dropped a fraction. The lift began its smooth descent, the stars beyond the transparent panel slowly giving way to the layered interior of the station. Erin removed her crown. The gesture was unceremonious, almost casual, but it struck Elias harder than any threat from the council. She held the crown for a moment, then set it carefully into a recessed niche in the wall where it locked into place with a soft click. Without it, she looked not less powerful but more real, older, tired, human in a way that unsettled him. "You should be afraid," she said. The statement was calm, observational. "I am," Elias replied honestly. "Good." She glanced at him. "That means you are paying attention." The lift continued downward. "You disrupted a balance today," she went on. "Not intentionally, but intention matters less than effect. Several factions will assume you were placed beside me deliberately." "I wasn't," he said quickly. "I know." Her mouth curved faintly. "They will not believe you." That settled heavily in his chest. "What happens now?" he asked. Erin was quiet for several seconds. Elias had learned to respect her silences. They were never empty. "Now," she said finally, "they will test the narrative." The lift slowed. "They will look for cracks," she continued. "They will probe your history, your loyalties, your psychology. They will decide whether you are an asset, a vulnerability, or a temporary inconvenience. And if they decide wrong," Elias asked, "they rarely do." The doors opened onto a private wing of the station, clean, minimalist, shielded from public transit. The lighting was softer here, tuned to her species' visual spectrum. Elias blinked, adjusting. Erin stepped out. He followed. "You kept your hand steady," she said, as if commenting on something trivial, "even when it hurt." "I didn't think about it," he admitted. "It just felt necessary." She stopped walking, turned to face him fully. Up close, without the distance of ceremony, the bioluminescent markings along her temples pulsed faintly, responding to emotional state rather than command. He wondered how many people had ever stood this close to her without kneeling. "How often," she asked quietly, "do humans choose presence over safety?" Elias hesitated. "Not often enough." She studied him for a long moment, gaze sharp and searching. He had the distinct sensation of being assessed, not as a diplomat, not as a symbol, but as something more personal, something more dangerous. "You were not selected," she said at last. "You were revealed." The word sent a chill through him. "I don't know what that means," he said. "You will." She turned away, resuming her walk, and so will they. They entered a chamber that was clearly hers, private, secure, stripped of excess. A wide viewport overlooked the station's inner traffic lanes. Vessels drifted past like slow-moving thoughts. Erin gestured toward a seat across from a low table. "Sit," she said. Elias obeyed. She remained standing for a moment longer, hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, head bowed just slightly. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, not weaker but unguarded. "The consort's seat was not empty by accident," she said. "It was left empty to invite challenge." Elias frowned. "Invite." Absence creates opportunity, she said, for predators, for reformers, for those who believe grief makes rulers predictable. And me being there, he trailed off, complicated that assumption. She met his eyes. You made the absence ambiguous. He swallowed. I didn't mean to. That, she said softly, is precisely why it worked. The room felt warmer now. Or perhaps he was simply more aware of his own body again, of fatigue, of the strange hum beneath his skin that had not been there before today. Aaron straightened. You will remain with me during my stay on the station, she said, publicly, privately, as needed. Elia's heart stuttered. As what? He asked carefully. She considered him. Continuity, she said. The word settled between them, heavy with implication. Outside the viewport, a ship ignited its engines, light flaring briefly against the dark. Elias realized with a mixture of dread and clarity that his life had just diverged irreversibly from every path he had imagined, and that stepping away now, if he even could, might cost more than staying ever would. Whatever role he had stumbled into, it was no longer accidental, and Queen Erin knew it. The announcement came before Elias fully understood what it meant to belong somewhere he had not chosen. It was delivered with ceremonial neutrality. No raised voices, no dramatic pauses, just a quiet shift in the station's internal channels. His name appeared on more screens than he could count, paired with Queen Erin's in a configuration that made his stomach tighten. Human liaison Elias Mercer, temporary continuity adjunct. Temporary was doing a lot of work. He stood beside her on a raised platform overlooking the station's central concourse, its layered walkways alive with motion. Delegations passed below like currents in a controlled sea, every movement observed, categorized, remembered. Erin stood perfectly still, hands folded before her, crown restored, armor immaculate. Elias felt conspicuously human. His attire, formal, restrained, deliberately unremarkable, suddenly seemed loud in its simplicity. He resisted the urge to adjust his collar again. Fidgeting, he had learned, was read as weakness by at least 3 species present. Erin leaned toward him, just enough that the movement could be dismissed as coincidence. Do not speak unless spoken to, she said quietly. Do not correct anyone publicly, and whatever you feel, do not apologize. For what? He asked. For existing, she replied. The concourse quieted as the assembled observers realized something unprecedented was unfolding. Elias felt the attention settle on him like pressure. He had never been so visible, and never so aware of how little control he had over the story being written around him. A senior delegate stepped forward, a being whose surface shimmered with adaptive pigmentation, their presence accompanied by a subtle distortion of light. We acknowledge the Queen's prerogative, the delegate said, voice translated into something smooth and courteous. However, the council must inquire into the nature of this appointment. Erin did not answer immediately. She let the silence stretch just long enough to remind them that patience was also a weapon. Elias Mercer, she said at last, is not an appointment. She turned her head slightly, eyes never leaving the delegate. He is a consequence. The word rippled outward. Elias felt it in his bones. The delegate's surface patterns flickered, surprise, irritation, recalculation. A human consequence, they said carefully, introduces variables. Yes, Erin agreed. That is why he is effective. Her hand shifted, fingers brushing the back of his wrist. Not a grip this time, but a reminder. He did not pull away. The exchange ended without resolution, which was its own kind of victory. The delegates withdrew, already reconfiguring strategies. Elias exhaled slowly, pulse racing. As the concourse resumed its hum, Erin turned to him. You will be tested, she said. Not with questions, with proximity. I'm already being tested, he said. No, she replied softly. This was the announcement. The testing begins now. They moved through the station together, a path clearing without overt command. Elias noticed the way guards adjusted positions, not closer, not farther, simply aware. The choreography of power was everywhere, and he was now part of it whether he understood it or not. Their first stop was a diplomatic reception chamber, ostensibly informal, its lighting warmer, its acoustics designed to encourage conversation. Elias immediately recognized the trap. Informality bred mistakes. Erin seemed perfectly at ease. She navigated the room with effortless authority, accepting greetings, exchanging brief words, never lingering long enough to invite intimacy. Elias stayed at her side, half a step back, mirroring her pace, absorbing glances like static. A delegate approached, a tall figure with elongated features and eyes that reflected data overlays. "You are calm," they said to Elias abruptly. He blinked. "I'm very good at appearing calm." "Appearance and reality are rarely aligned," the delegate observed. Elias considered this. "That's true," he said, "but sometimes appearance is all that's required." The delegate studied him for a moment longer, then inclined their head and moved on. Erin glanced at him, the faintest hint of approval in her expression. "Careful," she murmured. "You are becoming interesting. I was hoping to avoid that." She almost smiled. As the reception wore on, Elias began to sense the pattern. He was being circled, evaluated from multiple angles, questions that were not questions, compliments that were not compliments. Each interaction a probe, testing his reactions, his alignment, his usefulness. At one point, a junior envoy stumbled slightly, tray of luminescent vessels tilting precariously. Elias moved without thinking, steadying the tray before anything spilled. The envoy flushed, murmuring thanks. The room noticed. Erin noticed. Later, in a quiet corridor between engagements, she stopped him. "You act," she said, "without calculating the cost." "It doesn't feel like action," Elias replied. "It feels like reflex." "That is what makes it dangerous," she said gently. "Reflex reveals character." They resumed walking. Elias' mind raced. He had not sought influence, yet it was gathering around him anyway, drawn by something he could not name. He wondered how long before someone decided the simplest solution was removal. As if summoned by the thought, a shadow detached itself from an alcove ahead, a figure clad in the neutral tones of station security, posture deferential. "Your presence is requested," the figure said, addressing Erin. Then, after a fractional pause, "Both of you." Erin's expression did not change. "Where?" she asked. "A private advisory chamber," the figure replied. "Immediate." Elias felt a chill. Erin's hand closed briefly around his wrist, once firm, grounding. "Stay with me," she said quietly. This time, the words were not instruction. They were confirmation. As they followed the figure down a corridor Elias had never seen before, shielded from public view, he understood something with unsettling clarity. He was no longer standing beside the Queen because of a mistake. He was standing beside her because someone, somewhere, had decided it mattered, and whatever waited for them beyond the next door would make that decision irreversible. The advisory chamber was smaller than Elias expected. Not intimate, nothing on the station truly was, but contained, deliberately constrained. The walls were matte and light-absorbent, designed to prevent both surveillance and spectacle. No banners, no symbols of authority, only a circular table embedded into the floor and 3 seats arranged in a precise, unsettling symmetry. 2 were already occupied. Elias felt the shift before Erin did, not fear exactly, but recognition. This was not a courtesy meeting. This was an evaluation. The first figure was familiar, an arbiter of concordance, their form wrapped in layered containment fields that shimmered faintly with regulation energy. The second was something else entirely, humanoid in outline but wrong in the details. Too still, too precise. Eyes like polished glass reflecting probability rather than light. The door sealed behind them. "Queen Erin Valsyra," the arbiter said, voice harmonized into neutrality. "Thank you for attending promptly." Erin inclined her head just enough to acknowledge protocol without surrendering ground. She did not sit. Neither did Elias. "That will not be necessary," the arbiter continued, gesturing toward the seats. "This is not a negotiation." Aaron's gaze sharpened. Then you should not have summoned me. A flicker passed through the arbiter's fields, irritation quickly suppressed. This session concerns deviation, the second figure said. Their voice did not pass through a translator. It arrived already comprehensible, as if Elias' mind had been adjusted without permission. You may address me as auditor. Elias disliked them immediately. Aaron placed her hand lightly against the back of Elias' wrist, not gripping, not signaling alarm, just anchoring. He understood now that these gestures were as much for her as for him. State your concern, she said. The auditor's gaze shifted to Elias, not rudely, clinically. The human's presence, they said, specifically its persistence. Elias resisted the urge to bristle at it. He is under my authority, Aaron replied. That is noted, the arbiter said, but authority does not exempt outcome. The consort seat has functioned for centuries as a stabilizing absence. You have replaced that absence with an unvetted variable. Elias' heart thudded. Aaron's voice remained level. I replaced nothing. You altered perception, the auditor corrected. Perception alters behavior. Behavior alters probability. Their eyes returned to Elias. You remained seated. Yes, Elias said. Why? The room felt suddenly smaller. He considered lying, framing it as ignorance, fear, mistake. Instead, he told the truth. Because leaving would have made the silence louder, he said. The arbiter's fields pulsed. The auditor tilted their head. Explain. Elias swallowed. Everyone was watching the absence. Not her, not the treaty, the absence. Standing up would have confirmed it mattered more than anything else in the room. Silence followed. Aaron's fingers pressed lightly against his wrist. The auditor studied him for a long moment. You recognized symbolic gravity without instruction. I recognize people, Elias replied quietly. Power just happens to be louder about it. The arbiter shifted. This is precisely the concern. Humans, the auditor said, possess an unusual relationship with proximity. You assign meaning to physical presence disproportionate to strategic value. Aaron's gaze hardened. You say that as if it is a flaw. In governance, the auditor replied, it often is. They turned fully toward Elias. Your continued presence increases uncertainty across multiple models. Some factions interpret you as replacement, others as provocation, a few as precedent. That sounds like their problem, Elias said before he could stop himself. The arbiter stiffened. Aaron did not correct him. The auditor's lips curved, not a smile but something adjacent. Interesting. They leaned back slightly. We must determine whether the human is temporary. And if he is not, Aaron asked. Then he becomes a vulnerability, the arbiter said. Elias felt the word settle like ice. A vulnerability to whom? He asked. To you, the arbiter replied, looking at Aaron, and to the concordance. Aaron straightened, the room subtly recalibrating around her. You mistake connection for weakness. The auditor raised a hand. Not weakness, exposure. They turned to Elias once more. Tell me, human, if your presence endangers her position, if remaining beside her increases the probability of conflict, will you leave? The question landed with brutal clarity. Elias felt Aaron's hand still. He understood the test. If he answered yes, he confirmed disposability. If he answered no, he confirmed attachment. Both carried risk. He chose a third path. I will stay, he said evenly, as long as she asks me to. The room went very still. Aaron's fingers tightened once, not in warning, in acknowledgement. The auditor regarded him with something approaching curiosity. Conditional loyalty. It's honest loyalty, Elias replied. That tends to scare people. The arbiter exhaled slowly. This complicates matters. Yes, Aaron said, that has been noted. The auditor stood. Very well, the evaluation will continue. Elias frowned. Continue how? You will remain visible, the auditor said. Observed, provoked, pressured. And if I fail? Elias asked. The auditor met his gaze. Then the absence returns. The implication was clear. When the door unsealed and they stepped back into the corridor, Elias' pulse finally caught up with him. His hands trembled faintly now that the restraint was gone. Aaron did not release his wrist immediately. "You answered correctly," she said quietly. "I didn't know there was a correct answer." "There rarely is," she replied, "but you chose alignment over fear." She paused, then added softly, "That is why they will not leave you alone." Elias laughed once breathless. "That's reassuring." Aaron stopped walking and faced him fully. "This path," she said, "does not lead back to the life you expected." "I figured that out around the time I sat down," he said. Her gaze softened just a fraction. "Then we proceed with open eyes." Somewhere deep within the station, systems adjusted, models recalculated, new probabilities formed. Elias felt it in his chest like the distant roll of thunder. The evaluation was no longer about whether he belonged beside the Queen. It was about whether the galaxy could afford to let him remain. The station changed after the evaluation. Not visibly, not in ways that could be logged or cited, but Elias felt it in the subtle recalibration of space around him. Corridors that once flowed now hesitated. Conversations softened when he passed. Doors opened a fraction faster, closed a fraction slower. He was being accounted for. Queen Erin noticed it too. He could tell by the way her pace adjusted, the way her gaze tracked reflections in polished surfaces, the way she positioned herself just slightly closer to him in public spaces. Not possessive, strategic, protective, though she would never name it that. They stood now on a private observation deck overlooking the station's outer arc. Beyond the transparent barrier, stars burned cold and distant, threaded by the faint glow of transit lanes. The Concordance station rotated slowly, a mechanical heartbeat anchoring fragile peace. "You should rest," Aaron said. "They will not stop today." "I'm not tired," Elias replied automatically. She looked at him. He corrected himself. "I am tired. I'm just not ready to stop." That earned him a quiet nod. Approval, perhaps. "You are experiencing acceleration," she said. "Your life has entered a denser trajectory." That's one way to put it. She leaned her forearms lightly against the barrier, crown removed again, armor loosened at the collar. In this light, without the armor of ceremony, the faint lines of strain at the edges of her eyes were visible. Elias realized with a start that he had never before been this close to someone who carried the weight of entire systems, and allowed herself no margin for collapse. "You know," he said carefully, "they're not wrong about one thing." Aaron did not look at him. "Which thing?" "My presence does change things." "Yes, and that makes me dangerous." She turned then fully, studying him with a gaze that had ended wars and begun them. "No," she said. "It makes you consequential. Dangerous is what happens when consequence is denied." The distinction settled into him, reshaping something he had always believed about himself. They were interrupted by a soft chime, priority channel. Aaron inclined her head, granting access. The projection that formed between them was not a person but a map, layers of probability overlaid on familiar space. Certain regions pulsed faintly. "Movement," the system reported. 3 factions have altered their schedules. 2 are requesting informal access. 1 has initiated a quiet withdrawal. Elias frowned. "Withdrawal." Aaron's expression hardened. "That one has decided you are not temporary." The word sent a chill through him. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means they will act indirectly," she replied. "Pressure your affiliations, test your limits, attempt to isolate you from me without appearing to do so. And if that fails—" Her silence answered him. Later, much later, Elias found himself alone for the first time since the council session. His assigned quarters were modest, secure, and conspicuously close to Aaron's private wing. The message was clear. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, and let the quiet settle. Only then did the weight hit him. The fear, the delayed tremor, the realization that staying, truly staying, meant exposure to forces that did not hesitate or miss. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He stood, pulse quickening, and opened the door. Aaron stood there, No guards, no crown, just her, framed by the soft corridor light, expression unreadable. "I was told humans prefer warning before difficult conversations," she said. He stepped aside. "We do." She entered the door ceiling behind her. The room felt suddenly smaller. "I need to know something," she said, turning to face him. "Not as a ruler, as a person." Elias swallowed. "All right. If they try to remove you," she said quietly, "by offering you safety elsewhere, status, protection, distance, will you take it?" The question was softer than the auditor's. That made it far more dangerous. Elias did not answer immediately. He thought of his life before the station, of anonymity, of controlled insignificance, of how easy it would be to disappear again. Then he thought of the council chamber, the empty seat, the way her hand had tightened and steadied around his. "No," he said finally, "not without you asking me to go." Aaron's breath caught just slightly. "You understand," she said, "that staying may cost you everything else." "I think," he replied gently, "it already has." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then we are aligned." The words were simple. Their meaning was not. She moved toward the door, paused, then turned back. "You are no longer an observer, Elias," she said. "You are a factor." When she left, the room felt colder, but not empty. Elias lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, heart still racing. Somewhere deep within the station, systems recalculated again. The evaluation had moved beyond theory. Now it was personal, and the galaxy was watching to see which of them would blink first. The first attempt came disguised as kindness. Elias recognized it only because it felt wrong in a way that was almost gentle. The message arrived while he was standing beside Aaron during a routine transit through the station's inner ring. It bypassed his public channels and resolved directly on his personal slate, marked with the highest tier of administrative clearance. Human liaison Elias Mercer. Private opportunity, confidential. He did not open it immediately. He felt Aaron's attention shift, not to the slate itself, but to him. She did not ask. She never asked questions she already knew the answer to. "Read it," she said quietly. Elias exhaled and did. The offer was precise, surgical, designed by people who understood humans very well. A permanent posting, neutral territory, elevated status, autonomy, protection, no more exposure, no more pressure. A role framed as essential but distant, important enough to soothe his conscience, far enough to sever proximity. A safe exit. He closed the slate. "They're offering me a promotion," he said. "Yes," Aaron replied. "An exile." Politely, he added. She stopped walking. The corridor continued around them, traffic flowing, voices overlapping, but a small pocket of stillness formed where they stood, as if space itself were waiting. "This is the first test," she said. "They will escalate." Elias nodded. "I figured." He did not immediately delete the message. That, too, was deliberate. Acceptance or refusal too quickly would signal weakness. Hesitation created uncertainty. "They think distance will dilute meaning," he said. "They think correctly," Aaron replied. "Distance always does." Her honesty startled him. "Then why keep me here?" he asked. She looked at him, not as queen, not as strategist, but as something stripped of armor. "Because some meanings cannot survive distance," she said, "and because you already changed the shape of the room once. They will not forget that." Later that cycle, the second attempt came. This one wore teeth. Elias was intercepted in a public atrium by a delegation whose faction specialized in logistical accidents. Their representative was cordial, articulate, and entirely uninterested in Aaron's presence. They spoke directly to him. "You have become a focal point," the delegate said, tone mild. "Focal points attract force." Aaron's posture shifted just a fraction, but she did not intervene. "Are you threatening me?" Elias asked. "Informing you," the delegate replied, "of probabilities. I've had a lot of those lately." They smiled. "Then you understand the value of minimizing risk." Elias glanced at Aaron. She was watching him now, not the delegate, him. "Risk isn't minimized by erasing variables," Elias said slowly. It's managed by understanding them. The delegate's eyes narrowed. You believe yourself understood. No, Elias replied, but I believe I'm visible. That was enough. The delegate withdrew, their interest recalibrated, threat postponed rather than executed. Elias felt the delayed tremor run through him only after they were gone. Erin exhaled. You did well, she said. I didn't feel like I did. That, she said, means you are learning. The third attempt was quieter still. It came not from outside, but from within. Elias lay awake in his quarters, staring at the dimmed ceiling when doubt finally found purchase. Not fear of death or disgrace, but something subtler, more corrosive. You don't belong here. You are borrowing gravity that isn't yours. Eventually the cost will be paid. He sat up, hands shaking faintly. The door chimed softly. He did not need to check who it was. Erin entered without ceremony, her presence steady, unguarded. She did not speak at first. She simply stood there as she had in the council chamber, unmoving, undeniable. You felt it, she said. Yes. They are attempting to make you choose solitude, she continued. Doubt is efficient. Elias laughed quietly without humor. It's working. She crossed the room and sat beside him, not touching but close enough that the space between them mattered. You think this is about worth, she said. It is not. It is about endurance. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw something he had missed before. She was afraid too, not of losing power, of losing continuity. I can leave, he said softly, if that protects what you've built. Erin's gaze sharpened instantly. No, she said, that is what they want you to offer. She paused, then added quietly, and what I will not accept. The silence that followed was different from all the others they had shared. It was mutual, aligned. I stayed because you asked me to, Elias said. I'm still here because I chose to be. Erin nodded once. Then tomorrow, she said, we stop reacting. He raised an eyebrow. And do what? She stood, we act. As she left, Elias felt something settle inside him. Not confidence, not certainty, but readiness. The attempts would continue. The pressure would increase. Someone would eventually force the issue into the open. But now, for the first time since he had sat in the wrong seat, he understood the truth of his position. He was not a shield. He was not a replacement. He was leverage. And tomorrow, the galaxy would learn what happened when quiet variables stopped behaving predictably. The council chamber felt different the second time. Not because anything had changed in its architecture. The symmetry remained perfect. The stars beyond the transparent walls still stitched slow arcs across the dark. But because Elias no longer experienced it as a place that happened to him. This time he walked in knowing why he was there. Queen Erin entered beside him, crown set, armor immaculate. The room recalibrated instantly as it always did. Gravity favored her. Attention followed. And then inevitably it slid toward him. The absence was no longer the most watched thing in the room. He was. They took their seats, not the same seats as before. The consort's throne remained empty, visibly so, unmistakably acknowledged. Elias' chair was placed just beside it, deliberately distinct, close enough to imply continuity, far enough to deny replacement. Erin had chosen the geometry herself. The council assembled. Delegations settled. Atmospheric fields stabilized. The hum beneath the floor deepened into something almost expectant. The auditor was present again. So was the arbiter. Others Elias recognized only by reputation, those who measured influence in centuries rather than cycles. The first speaker rose. They did not circle the issue this time. Clarification is required, they said smoothly, regarding the human's role. Erin did not answer. She did not need to. Elias stood. The movement rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. He felt it immediately. The sudden recalibration, the flare of attention, the instinctive readiness for disruption. He had stood once before in this room, trembling and uncertain. This time his hands were steady. I am not here as consort, he said. His voice carried farther than he expected. Nor as representative, nor as symbol of replacement. The auditor's gaze sharpened. I am here, Elias continued, because absence was being used as leverage, and because presence, human presence, complicates that strategy. A murmur spread. You are temporary, someone said. Yes, Elias agreed calmly, everything is. That earned him silence. He turned slightly, just enough to include Aaron in his peripheral vision, not as support but as alignment. I was offered distance, he said. Safety, removal disguised as promotion. I declined. The arbiter stiffened. Not out of loyalty, Elias added. Out of accuracy. Removing me would not restore stability. It would confirm fear. The chamber leaned in. I will remain, he said, only as long as I am asked. I will leave the moment my presence becomes coercive rather than chosen. Aaron rose then. The timing was perfect. He speaks with my authority, she said, and without obligation. The distinction mattered. This is not precedent, she continued. It is context. You will not receive another consort. You will not receive a replacement. You will receive governance that acknowledges loss without exploiting it. Her gaze swept the chamber. And you will stop testing the absence. The words landed like final clauses. Systems responded. Probability fields stabilized. The chamber's ambient tone shifted, subtle, unmistakable, agreement, not unanimous, but sufficient. As the council adjourned, Elias felt the familiar drain of adrenaline give way to exhaustion. The weight of what he had done pressed in now, heavy and real. He sat. Aaron remained standing a moment longer, then turned to him. You changed the rules, she said quietly. I didn't mean to, he replied. She shook her head. You recognized them. They walked out together, not as spectacle, not as scandal, but as something quieter and more enduring. In the corridor beyond, the station resumed its endless motion. Life went on. Politics recalculated. Stories began forming in 100 languages. At the viewport overlooking the stars, Aaron stopped. It will not be easy from here, she said, for either of us. Elias nodded. I didn't expect it to be. She studied him for a long moment, then did something no one else was there to witness. She reached out and took his hand. Not as anchor, not as shield, as choice. You may leave when you wish, she said. You will always be able to. Elias squeezed her hand gently. Then I'll stay, he said, until you don't ask me to. Aaron smiled, not almost, not restrained, but real. Outside, the stars drifted on, indifferent as ever. Inside, something fragile and deliberate had taken shape. Not a throne filled, not a void erased, but a balance rewritten. Elias had come to